My name is Alex Carter, and I took the night shift at Blackwood Memorial Hospital back in the fall of 2021. I was broke, desperate, and on the verge of dropping out of college when I saw the ad online. Overnight security needed. No experience required. High pay. Too good to be true, right? It was. The hospital had been abandoned since the 1980s after a series of unexplained patient deaths. Some said there were malpractice cover-ups. Others whispered that something far worse happened in those halls. Still, I needed the money. On my first night, the supervisor, a gruff old man named Walt, handed me a flashlight, a walkie-talkie that barely worked, and a single sheet of paper. "Memorize these rules," he said, his voice gravelly. "Break M, and you're on your own." The paper had 5 rules, and I broke every single one. Rule 1, never enter the basement alone. The basement was off limits. No exceptions. As a new security guard at Blackwood Memorial Hospital, I had heard the warnings from my colleagues. The basement was a place of darkness, both literally and figuratively. It was where the hospital stored old equipment, but it was also rumored to be the resting place of secrets best left undisturbed. On my third night, the air was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling. I was making my rounds, checking the monitors, when I heard it, a faint, rhythmic thudding echoing from the lower level. It sounded like someone dragging heavy objects across the floor, a sound that sent a chill down my spine. Curiosity gnawed at me, pulling me toward the basement door. I hesitated, recalling Walt's warning, never enter the basement alone. But the thudding grew louder, almost insistent, and I felt an inexplicable urge to investigate. I took a deep breath and descended the stairs, my flashlight flickering ominously. The air grew colder with each step, and I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in around me. As I reached the bottom, I was met with a dimly lit corridor lined with old gurneys, their metal frames rusted and covered in stained sheets. My heart raced as I stepped further into the room, the thudding sound now clearer. It was coming from the far end of the basement. I squinted into the shadows, and that's when I saw them. Dozens of gurneys, all lined up in neat rows, but one stood out. At the far end, one gurney was rocking back and forth, as if someone had just been lying there and had sat up. My breath caught in my throat. I could hardly believe my eyes. The sheet covering the gurney fluttered slightly, as if disturbed by an unseen force. I took a cautious step forward, my heart pounding in my chest. The rhythmic thudding intensified, now sounding like a heartbeat echoing in the silence. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. What was happening? Suddenly, the gurney stopped rocking, and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. I turned to leave, but as I did, I heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Stay." Panic surged through me. I didn't wait to hear more. I bolted for the stairs, my feet pounding against the concrete as I raced back up. The darkness seemed to close in around me, and I could have sworn I heard footsteps chasing me, echoing my frantic escape. I burst through the door and slammed it shut behind me, my heart racing. I leaned against the wall, gasping for breath, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But deep down, I knew I had seen something that shouldn't have been there. The thudding had stopped, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I glanced back at the basement door, half expecting it to swing open, revealing whatever had been lurking in the shadows. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had disturbed something ancient and malevolent. I vowed never to return to the basement alone, but the memory of that rocking gurney haunted me. As I lay in my cot during the day, trying to catch up on sleep, I could still hear the faint echo of that rhythmic thudding in my mind. It was a sound that would forever remind me of the darkness that lurked beneath Blackwood Memorial Hospital, a darkness that was waiting for the next curious soul to wander too close. And I knew, deep down, that I had barely escaped its grasp. Rule 2. Always keep the lights on. The hospital's generator was ancient, a relic from a time when Blackwood Memorial was still a bustling medical facility. It had a mind of its own, cutting out at random intervals, leaving the building shrouded in darkness. My colleagues had warned me, always keep the lights on. But I was young and brash, convinced that I could handle whatever the night threw at me. One night, around 2 a.m., I was making my usual rounds, the fluorescent lights flickering ominously above me. I had just settled into my office, sipping lukewarm coffee, when the lights went out completely. The sudden silence was deafening, and my heart raced as I fumbled for my flashlight. Just as I clicked it on, the beam flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me as I banged the flashlight against my palm, willing it to work. The air turned icy, and I could feel a chill creeping up my spine. And then, a sound broke the silence. Distant giggling. It was a child's voice, light and playful, echoing through the empty halls. "Can we play hide and seek?" My blood ran cold. I strained to listen, trying to pinpoint the source of the voice. Was it a trick of my mind? A remnant of the hospital's haunted past? I had heard stories of children who had once been patients here, their laughter now a ghostly echo in the abandoned corridors. I stood frozen, my breath shallow, as the giggling continued, growing louder and more insistent. I wanted to call out, to ask who was there, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I crept toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, bathing the hallway in harsh fluorescent light. I blinked, momentarily blinded, and then rushed to the security monitors. My hands trembled as I switched on the feed, hoping to find some explanation for the eerie laughter. But what I saw made my blood run cold. On the screen, a blurry figure stood in the hallway outside my office. It was tall and thin, wearing a doctor's coat that hung loosely from its frame. The figure was facing away from the camera, but I could see the outline of its head. Something was terribly wrong. The face was distorted, as if it had been stretched or melted. The features were grotesque, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through the screen. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I blinked, hoping it was just a trick of the light, but when I looked again, the figure was still there, unmoving. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. Then, without warning, the figure turned its head slowly, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Its eyes were dark voids, and its mouth twisted into a smile that was anything but friendly. I stumbled back from the monitors, my heart racing. I had to get out of there. I grabbed my keys and bolted for the door, but as I reached for the handle, the lights flickered again, plunging me into darkness once more. The giggling returned, now echoing all around me, as if the child was right beside me. "Come play with us." I didn't wait to hear more. I flung the door open and sprinted down the hallway, the laughter following me like a sinister shadow. I could feel the cold air closing in, and I didn't stop until I reached the main entrance, gasping for breath. When I finally stepped outside, the night air felt like a balm against my skin. I looked back at the hospital, its windows dark and foreboding. I had escaped, but the memory of that distorted figure and the child's laughter would haunt me long after I left. From that night on, I made sure to keep the lights on, both in the hospital and in my mind. Because some darkness is better left unlit, and some games are best left unplayed. Rule 3. Don't disturb the old medical equipment. The third floor of Blackwood Memorial Hospital was a ghostly reminder of its former glory, a surgical wing frozen in time. Dust hung in the air like a shroud, and the faint smell of antiseptic lingered, a haunting echo of the lives once saved and lost within these walls. Rows of rusted scalpels lined the shelves, their edges dulled by years of neglect. Oxygen tanks stood like sentinels, covered in a thick layer of dust, as if waiting for a time when they would be needed again. But it was the operating room that drew me in, a fully preserved table at its center, gleaming under the dim light. I had heard the stories from my colleagues about the horrors that had taken place here, but curiosity got the better of me. I stepped inside, my heart racing with a mix of excitement and dread. As I approached the operating table, I felt an inexplicable pull, as if the room itself was beckoning me closer. The metal surface was cold to the touch, and I hesitated for a moment, recalling the warnings, "Don't disturb the old medical equipment." But I was young and foolish, convinced that I could handle whatever lay ahead. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold metal. The moment I made contact, a jolt of energy surged through me, and the heart monitor beside the table blipped to life. Beep, beep, beep. My heart raced in sync with the monitor, and I felt a rush of adrenaline. Was this some kind of malfunction? I stepped back, but the beeping continued, growing louder and more insistent. Panic set in as I realized I had awakened something that should have remained undisturbed. Then, without warning, the monitor flatlined. Beep. The sound echoed in the sterile room, a chilling reminder of the finality of death. My breath caught in my throat as I turned to leave, but before I could move, something grabbed my wrist from beneath the table. I yanked free, adrenaline coursing through my veins, but not before catching a glimpse of what had seized me. Long, skeletal fingers curled back into the darkness, retreating as if they had never been there at all. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. The room felt alive, the air thick with an oppressive energy. I could almost hear whispers, faint and unintelligible, swirling around me like a storm. I had disturbed something that had been lying in wait, something that had no intention of letting me go easily. I bolted for the door, my mind racing with thoughts of what I had just encountered. The stories I had dismissed as mere urban legends suddenly felt all too real. I could still feel the cold grip of those fingers on my wrist, a reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of the hospital. As I reached the hallway, I glanced back at the operating room, half expecting to see the skeletal figure emerge from the shadows. But the room was silent, the heart monitor now dark and lifeless. I could feel the weight of the hospital pressing down on me, the memories of the past echoing in the silence. From that night on, I made a vow to myself. I would never disturb the old medical equipment again. The surgical wing was a place of lost souls, and I had no desire to join them. I learned that some things are better left untouched, buried in the shadows of history. As I left the hospital that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. The fingers that had grabbed my wrist were a warning, a reminder that the past is not always as dead as we would like to believe. And in the depths of Blackwood Memorial, the echoes of the past still lingered, waiting for the next curious soul to disturb their slumber. Rule 4. Respect the patient's rooms. Room 413 was notorious among the staff at Blackwood Memorial Hospital. The door hung askew on its hinges, creaking ominously whenever the wind blew through the empty halls. It was said that a voice could sometimes be heard from within, a soft, pleading whisper that sent chills down the spine of anyone brave enough to venture near. "Help me," it would call, echoing through the desolate corridors. I had heard the stories, but like any young security guard, I was drawn to the mystery. Curiosity gnawed at me, and I found myself standing outside room 413 one night, the dim light from my flashlight flickering as I hesitated. The air felt heavy, thick with an unshakable sense of dread. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open, the rusty hinges protesting with a loud creak. The room was dark, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the grimy window. My heart raced as I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight. In the far corner, an old woman sat on the bed, her frail figure silhouetted against the window. She was facing away from me, her long gray hair cascading down her back. I felt a strange pull toward her, as if she were a beacon in the darkness. "They never let us leave," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I stepped closer, my curiosity overpowering my fear. Who was she? I wondered. What had happened to her? But as I approached, I froze, a cold wave of terror washing over me. Her reflection in the glass wasn't moving. I blinked, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light. But the truth was undeniable. The woman was still, her gaze fixed on the window, as if she were waiting for something or someone. I took another step forward, my heart pounding in my chest. What was happening? I felt a sense of foreboding, a warning that I was crossing a line I shouldn't. And then, she turned to look at me. My breath caught in my throat as I met her gaze. Her eyes were hollow, devoid of life, and her mouth, it was a grotesque sight. Where her lips should have been, there were only stitches, crisscrossing her face like a macabre tapestry. I stumbled back, my mind racing. This wasn't just an old woman. This was something far more sinister. The stories I had dismissed as mere folklore suddenly felt all too real. I had entered a realm where the boundaries between life and death blurred, where the past lingered like a ghost, refusing to let go. "Help me," she repeated, her voice now a haunting echo that reverberated in my mind. I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the room with her. Panic surged through me as I pounded on the door, desperate to escape. The old woman's gaze bore into me, and I could feel the weight of her sorrow pressing down on my chest. "Help me," she whispered again, but this time, it felt like a command. I finally managed to wrench the door open, stumbling into the hallway, gasping for breath. The air felt electric, charged with the energy of the encounter. I glanced back at room 413, half expecting to see her standing in the doorway, but the room was dark and silent once more. From that night on, I made a vow to respect the patient's rooms. They were not just empty spaces. They were filled with memories, with souls that had once inhabited them. I had learned that some doors should remain closed, and some voices should not be answered. As I left the hospital that night, I couldn't shake the image of the old woman's stitched mouth from my mind. I had crossed a line, and I knew that the echoes of her plea would haunt me long after I left Blackwood Memorial. In the depths of that hospital, the past was alive, and it was waiting for the next curious soul to disturb its slumber. Rule 5: leave before dawn. The worst was the last night. I had been working at Blackwood Memorial Hospital for a few weeks, and the eerie atmosphere had become almost routine. I had learned to navigate the shadows, to ignore the whispers that echoed through the halls. But that night, I made a critical mistake. I stayed too long, caught up in paperwork that seemed to multiply with every passing hour. As the clock ticked closer to dawn, I felt a sense of unease creeping in. The hospital was silent, the kind of silence that felt heavy and oppressive. I glanced at the clock, 4:47 a.m. I should have been wrapping up my shift, but the reports were piling up, and I convinced myself that just a few more minutes wouldn't hurt. Suddenly, the PA system crackled to life, jolting me from my thoughts. A voice I didn't recognize echoed through the empty halls, cold and mechanical. "Code Black. Lock the doors." My heart dropped. Code Black. I had never heard that before. A sense of dread washed over me as I stood up, my instincts screaming that something was very wrong. And then, from every hallway, I heard it. The sound of gurneys rolling, their wheels squeaking against the floor. Doors slammed shut with a force that reverberated through the building, and I could hear footsteps marching in unison, a rhythmic pounding that sent chills down my spine. I didn't wait to investigate. Panic surged through me, and I sprinted toward the exit, my heart racing. The hospital felt alive, the walls closing in around me as I reached the main doors. I yanked on the handle, but they wouldn't budge. Padlocked from the outside. My breath quickened as I turned to look back down the hallway. The footsteps were getting closer, echoing ominously in the silence. I could feel something watching me, something that breathed like it hadn't in years. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, and I knew I had to escape. I glanced around, searching for another way out. The basement window. I remembered the small, grimy window I had seen during my rounds. It was my only chance. I dashed down the corridor, the sound of gurneys rolling behind me growing louder, more insistent. As I reached the basement door, I flung it open and raced down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The darkness enveloped me, but I didn't stop. I could hear the footsteps now, a cacophony of sound that echoed through the empty halls. I felt like I was being hunted. Finally, I reached the small window at the end of the basement. I pushed against it, and to my relief, it opened with a creak. I scrambled through, the cold night air hitting my face like a slap. I landed on the ground outside, gasping for breath, and looked back at the hospital. The building loomed behind me, dark and foreboding, its windows like empty eyes watching my escape. I could still hear the distant sounds of gurneys and footsteps, but they were fading now, swallowed by the night. I barely made it out. I had crossed a line, and I knew it. The hospital was a place of darkness, a place where the past lingered like a ghost. waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to wander too close. The next day, I quit. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something sinister. I had learned the hard way that some rules exist for a reason. Leaving before dawn wasn't just a suggestion, it was a warning. As I drove away from Blackwood Memorial, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. But the hospital was silent, its secrets hidden behind closed doors. I vowed never to return, knowing that some places are better left undisturbed, especially when the sun begins to rise. They found Walt, the supervisor, a week later. I had already quit my job at Blackwood Memorial Hospital, shaken to my core by the events of my last night. I had hoped to leave the darkness behind, but the memories clung to me like a shadow. I was still trying to process everything when the news broke. Walt was discovered sitting at his desk, his eyes wide and pupils dilated in terror. The coroner ruled it a heart attack, but I knew better. I had seen the toll that the hospital took on those who dared to linger too long. The weight of its history pressed down on everyone who entered, and Walt had been no exception. I couldn't shake the image of him from my mind. He had been a gruff but fair supervisor, always warning us about the dangers of the night shift. I remembered his voice, gravelly and serious, as he recounted the stories of the hospital's past. He had always seemed unfazed by the whispers and shadows, but now I wondered if he had known more than he let on. Before I left for good, I felt compelled to check the security logs one last time. I needed to understand what had happened during that fateful night when the PA system crackled to life and the hospital descended into chaos. As I scrolled through the footage, my heart raced. The timestamps confirmed my worst fears. That night, when the doors locked and the gurneys rolled, the cameras recorded a full house. Every bed was occupied. Every patient was sitting up, their eyes wide and unblinking, staring into the void. I felt a chill run down my spine as I watched the footage. The patients, once lifeless and still, were now animated, their faces twisted in expressions of longing and despair. They were waiting for something or someone. I leaned closer to the screen, my breath hitching in my throat. The footage showed them in their rooms, some whispering to one another, others gazing blankly at the walls. But what struck me the most was the way they all seemed to be aware of the camera, their eyes locking onto the lens as if they could see me through the screen. It was as if they were waiting for the next guard to break the rules, to disturb the delicate balance that kept them tethered to this world. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Had I been one of them? Had I unknowingly invited their wrath by entering their domain? I quickly shut off the monitor, my heart racing. I couldn't bear to watch any longer. The hospital was a place of darkness, a place where the past lingered like a ghost, and I had narrowly escaped its grasp. As I left the building for the last time, I glanced back at the imposing structure, its windows dark and foreboding. I could almost hear the whispers of the patients, their voices echoing in my mind. I had broken the rules, and I knew that the consequences would haunt me forever. In the days that followed, I tried to move on, but the memories of Blackwood Memorial clung to me like a shroud. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had left something behind, something that would continue to wait in the shadows, watching and waiting for the next curious soul to wander too close. I had escaped, but the hospital's secrets were far from buried. I knew that the darkness would always be there, lurking just beneath the surface, ready to ensnare the next unsuspecting guard who dared to break the rules. And as I lay in bed at night, I could still hear the echoes of their whispers, a chilling reminder of the price of curiosity. I don't know what truly happened at Blackwood Memorial Hospital. The stories I heard during my time, there were a mix of urban legend and chilling reality. Maybe the patients never really left. Perhaps their spirits lingered, trapped in a place that had once been their sanctuary. Or maybe the doctors sealed something inside those walls, something dark and malevolent that fed on the fear of those who dared to enter. All I know is that some doors should stay closed. The hospital was a labyrinth of memories, each room holding echoes of lives once lived, and the shadows that danced in the corners were not just figments of my imagination. They were reminders of the past, of the souls who had suffered, and the secrets that had been buried deep within the hospital's foundation. And some rules? They exist for a reason. I learned that the hard way. The warnings from my colleagues, the tales of those who had come before me. They were not just stories to scare the new hires. They were lessons, etched in the fabric of the hospital's history. Each rule was a safeguard against the darkness that lurked just beyond the light. A reminder that curiosity can lead to consequences far beyond our understanding. As I reflect on my time at Blackwood, I can still feel the weight of the hospital pressing down on me. The memories of the patients, the whispers in the night, and the chilling encounters haunt my thoughts. I can't shake the feeling that I left something behind, something that continues to wait in the shadows, watching and waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to wander too close. Pause for effect, then whisper, "Don't take the night shift." It's a warning I carry with me, a reminder of the darkness that exists in places we often overlook. Some doors should remain locked, and some nights should never be spent alone.